Every night as the sun sets over Michigan cities, the lights of Detroit, Lansing, and Flint begin to glow against the cold sky. But beneath that glow lies a silence that most people never hear. In the corners of these cities, in alleys, in abandoned buildings, and in parked cars, men, women, and children prepare themselves for another night without a home. They are not just numbers on a government chart. They are fathers. They are mothers. They are children who once dreamed of ordinary lives. In the richest country in the world, in a state known for the pride of the auto industry and the beauty of the Great Lakes, thousands live with no roof over their heads. In January 2025, the federal point-in-time count revealed that on any given night, more than 8,500 people in Michigan experience homelessness. Of those, nearly 2,500 are children. The number has risen by almost 12% since 2021, revealing years of slow progress. In Detroit alone, shelters report being overwhelmed, with waiting lists stretching into the hundreds. These are not faceless statistics. Each number carries a name, a memory, a story of survival. Imagine waking up in the freezing darkness of a Michigan winter, with no place to wash your face, no hot breakfast waiting, no school bus that feels welcoming. For most of us, home is the safest place in the world. But for the homeless in Michigan, the streets are anything but safe. The cold here kills. In 2024, at least 74 people in Michigan died from exposure while homeless, their bodies discovered in alleys, tents, and cars turned into makeshift bedrooms. Homelessness in Michigan is not just about poverty. It is a complex story of how systems fail the vulnerable. Job loss, mental health crises, domestic violence, substance addiction, soaring rent prices. Each is a domino, and when one falls, others follow. Behind every person you see sitting with a cardboard sign is often a series of collapses, one after another, until there is nothing left. Detroit, Flint, Lansing, cities once defined by booming industries, humming factories, and steady jobs. Now they carry scars of decline. When the auto industry shrank, when steel mills shuttered, when water turned poisonous in Flint, families lost not just paychecks but futures. The fall of industry was not just an economic blow. It was the beginning of a cycle of instability that still haunts Michigan today. Take Detroit. Once it was the manufacturing capital of the world, the proud home of Ford and General Motors, where a high school diploma could get you a job that could buy a house, raise a family, and retire with dignity. But in 2025, Detroit's poverty rate remains one of the highest in the nation, at nearly 30%. And in those neighborhoods where factories once roared, now stand abandoned houses, collapsed roofs, empty lots. The people left behind carry the weight of a system that has moved on without them. And yet behind the harsh statistics, there are human faces. A mother named Cassandra, who lost her job in Lansing when the restaurant she worked at closed during the pandemic. She tried to keep her family together, renting smaller apartments, working odd jobs. But when rents surged in 2023, up by more than 20% in Michigan cities, she could no longer afford a place to live. Now she and her 2 children sleep in the backseat of her car, moving from parking lot to parking lot, hopping not to be noticed. She says the hardest part isn't the cold, but her children asking, "Mom, when can we go home?" Or Robert, a veteran from Flint. He served in Iraq, returned with scars invisible to most, PTSD, nightmares, chronic pain. Promises of support and housing never materialized. In 2025, nearly 1,200 veterans are homeless in Michigan, men and women who once wore the uniform of their country. Robert spends his nights under an overpass, his only protection a thin sleeping bag and the company of others who share his fate. "We fought for this country," he says, "but it feels like we came back to nothing." These stories are not rare. They are everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Homelessness in Michigan is not always tense on sidewalks like in Philadelphia's Kensington Avenue or Los Angeles Skid Row. Here, it often hides. Families doubled up in crowded apartments, teenagers couchsurfing from friend to friend, people living in cars, parking behind supermarkets to avoid attention. This hidden homelessness makes the problem harder to see and harder to solve. Rural Michigan tells another part of the story. In small towns across the Upper Peninsula, in counties like Alger or Gojbek, homelessness looks different. It might be a family staying in a camper without heat, or an older man sheltering in a hunting shack. Resources here are scarce. The nearest shelter may be over 50 miles away. Public transportation is nearly non-existent. The rural homeless are invisible, not counted in surveys, not seen on nightly news, but their struggle is no less real. What drives this crisis deeper is housing itself. In 2025, Michigan faces an affordable housing shortage of nearly 200,000 units. For every 100 low-income renters, only 37 affordable homes exist. This mismatch forces families to make impossible choices: pay rent or buy food, heat their home or keep the lights on. One missed paycheck, one medical bill, one broken-down car, and stability collapses. But beyond numbers, beyond policy, there is something else that defines Michigan's homelessness crisis: stigma. Too many people still look at the homeless as if they are the problem, not the symptom of larger failures. They are dismissed as lazy, addicts, people who should have worked harder. Yet studies show that 40% of Michigan's homeless population are employed, working jobs that simply do not pay enough to cover housing. Hard work is not enough if rent is higher than wages, if health care is out of reach, if mental health support is impossible to afford. Still, amid this darkness, there are glimpses of light. Shelters across the state open their doors each winter, no questions asked. Nonprofits like the Shelter Association of Washtenaw County provide warmth, food, and dignity. In Detroit, Tiny Homes Detroit is building small houses that residents can rent for as little as $1 a month, with the chance to own them after 7 years. In Grand Rapids, micro-home communities are rising, offering not just shelter but counseling, job training, and a sense of belonging. But the truth is, these efforts, while inspiring, are not enough. Demand far outweighs supply. In Detroit, waiting lists for housing programs can stretch for months. Families desperate for stability are told to wait, when waiting means another night in the cold, another night of fear, another night of survival. Homelessness in Michigan is a crisis decades in the making, but it is also a reflection of us, of what we value, of who we choose to see, and who we choose to ignore. Behind every statistic is a story of loss, but also a story of resilience. People who, despite being broken down by the system, still wake up each day and try again. A mother still tucks her children in the backseat of her car. A veteran still salutes when he hears the national anthem. A teenager still dreams of graduating, even if he has no desk to study at. This is Michigan's hidden story. A story not found in glossy travel brochures, but on the sidewalks, in the shelters, in the cars parked in dark corners of empty lots. It is not just their story. It is ours. Because when one person has no place to live, it reflects on all of us. And this is where our journey begins. The story of homelessness in Michigan is not written in a single chapter. It is layered, complex, and often brutal. To understand it, we must peel back the surface and look at the roots, the systems that fail, the policies that falter, and the everyday battles that people fight just to survive. At its core, homelessness is not just about lacking a roof. It is about being stripped of stability, safety, and dignity. And in Michigan, this erosion often begins with something deceptively simple: housing. In 2025, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Detroit hovers around $1,150 a month. In Ann Arbor, it is closer to $1,400. To afford this rent without being cost-burdened, a worker would need to earn more than $23 an hour. Yet the minimum wage in Michigan remains at $10.33 an hour. That math is not survival math. It is a trap. For every 100 extremely low-income renters in Michigan, only 37 affordable and available units exist. That shortage is more than a statistic. It is a chasm into which families fall every single day. Take the story of Maria, a single mother in Grand Rapids. She works full-time at a nursing home, caring for the elderly with compassion and patience. She earns just under $15 an hour. On paper, she is employed, hardworking, responsible. But when her rent climbed by 18% in a single year, her paycheck simply couldn't keep up. She cut back on food. She skipped bills. She borrowed from relatives. Still, it wasn't enough. By the fall of 2024, Maria and her 2 children were evicted. They moved into a shelter that overflowed with families just like hers, people who never imagined homelessness would be part of their story. Maria is not alone. In 2025, nearly 1 in 3 renters in Michigan is severely cost-burdened, spending over half their income on housing. When housing consumes that much, one emergency, a broken car, a medical bill, reduced hours at work can trigger collapse. For too many, that collapse ends in a shelter, a car, or the street. But housing is only one domino. There are others. Mental health is another thread woven tightly into Michigan's homelessness crisis. According to state reports, more than 25% of Michigan's homeless population lives with serious mental illness. Depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, PTSD, conditions that require consistent care, therapy, and medication. Yet access remains painfully out of reach. In Detroit, wait lists for psychiatric appointments can stretch months. In rural counties of northern Michigan, there may be only one or two providers for hundreds of square miles. For someone already living without stability, those waits are more than delays. They are lifelines being cut. Substance use is another reality. Fentanyl, the synthetic opioid that has devastated cities like Philadelphia, has seeped into Michigan too. In 2024, more than 3,200 Michiganders died of drug overdoses, many linked to fentanyl. Among the homeless, where trauma runs deep and hope feels thin, drugs can become both escape and prison. Outreach workers in Detroit describe scenes of men and women bent over sidewalks, eerily similar to Philadelphia's Kensington Avenue. But in Michigan, these scenes play out in quieter corners, under bridges, or inside abandoned houses, hidden from cameras yet no less devastating. Then there is domestic violence. In 2025, more than 35% of women experiencing homelessness in Michigan cite domestic violence as the immediate cause. Shelters across the state report that survivors often face the impossible choice: stay with their abuser or face the streets. For many, homelessness feels safer than home. The layers continue: job loss, medical debt, the collapse of industries that once held entire communities together. Cities like Flint and Saginaw, where factories closed and jobs vanished, left behind more than economic scars. They left behind families living paycheck to paycheck, neighborhoods hollowed out, and a pipeline to poverty that feeds the homelessness crisis year after year. But statistics only go so far. To grasp the weight of this crisis, you have to hear the stories. Like Jamal, a 17-year-old from Lansing. He doesn't fit the image most people imagine when they hear homeless. He is a high school student, a varsity basketball player with dreams of college. But every night, he and his younger brother sleep on a friend's couch because their mother lost her job and their apartment. Jamal goes to school each morning with the same clothes stuffed in his backpack, hiding his reality from teammates and teachers. He says the hardest part is pretending everything is normal, when inside he feels invisible. In 2025, more than 13,000 Michigan students are experiencing homelessness, many hidden in exactly this way. Or Evelyn, a 62-year-old grandmother in Flint. After her husband died and medical bills piled up, she fell behind on mortgage payments. The house she had lived in for 30 years was foreclosed. Too young to retire, too old to find stable work, she now rotates between shelters and friends' couches. She carries a single suitcase. Inside it, family photos, a Bible, and her blood pressure medication. "I never thought this would happen to me," she says. "I used to walk past homeless people and think, they must have made bad choices. Now I know it can happen to anyone." Even as these personal stories unfold, Michigan tries to respond. The state government has launched initiatives, like expanding the Housing First model, which provides permanent housing before tackling employment or addiction. Studies show it works. Once people have stability, they are more likely to find work, seek treatment, and rebuild. In 2024, Michigan housed over 4,000 people through Housing First programs, but the waiting list is still twice that size. Other efforts are creative but small. In Grand Rapids, micro-home communities have sprung up, tiny but dignified structures, clustered together, offering not just shelter but a sense of community. In Traverse City, churches have opened parking lots for families living in cars, providing safe spaces with bathrooms and security. In Detroit, the Tiny Homes Project gives people the chance to rent for as little as $1 a month, eventually owning the property. For many, it is the first set of keys they've ever held. But these solutions, as inspiring as they are, cannot keep pace with the scale of the crisis. Michigan needs tens of thousands of affordable housing units, but in 2025, new construction is focused largely on luxury apartments and market-rate housing. Homeless shelters remain overcrowded, underfunded, and overstretched. Nonprofits patch holes where government fails, but burnout is common, and resources are thin. And yet, amid despair, there is resilience. Outreach workers describe moments of extraordinary courage. A homeless veteran who saves his food stamps to buy dog food for his companion. A mother who works double shifts and still reads bedtime stories to her children in the backseat of a car. A teenager who studies for exams by flashlight in a shelter. These are not people who have given up. They are people fighting battles most of us cannot imagine, every single day. Homelessness is not an identity. It is a condition. It is not permanent, but it can feel endless when the system designed to catch you collapses. And in Michigan, too many fall through the cracks. As the snow falls over Detroit's Woodward Avenue, as winds whip through the empty streets of Flint, as Lake Michigan waves crash against the shores of Grand Rapids, there are people out there tonight trying to survive. Their stories are not on the evening news. Their faces are not on billboards, but their struggle is real, raw, and relentless. Part 1 showed us the scope of the crisis. Part 2 reveals the roots, the housing shortages, the broken mental health systems, the ripple effects of job loss, violence, and addiction. It is not one issue. It is many, interlocked, feeding one another. But the story is not over, because even in the darkest corners there are sparks of hope. Sparks that, if fanned, could grow into something bigger. The question is not whether change is possible. It is whether we care enough to make it happen. And as we move forward into the next chapter of Michigan's story, we must ask, what will it take to turn sparks into fire? Homelessness in Michigan is not an isolated tragedy. It is part of a larger national wound. Across the United States in 2025, more than 770,000 people are homeless on any given night, the highest number ever recorded since data collection began. Of those, nearly 30% are families with children. And while cities like Los Angeles and New York capture headlines with sprawling tent encampments, states like Michigan reveal a quieter but equally devastating crisis, the kind that hides in plain sight. Compared to California, where more than 180,000 people are unhoused, Michigan's numbers may seem small, but scale is not the point. Proportion is. For a state with just over 10 million residents, Michigan's 8,500 unhoused people represent entire neighborhoods worth of lives erased from stability, erased from comfort, erased from the promise of the American dream. And the factors pushing people into the streets are not slowing. Inflation, soaring rents, rising utility costs, stagnant wages, all are converging. In 2025, a single parent earning minimum wage in Michigan would need to work 90 hours a week to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment. That is not a path to stability. That is a treadmill with no end. But the story of homelessness cannot end with despair. It must end with choices, because homelessness is not inevitable. It is the result of policy, of investment, of what a society chooses to prioritize. We know what works. The housing first model has been proven across the country. When people are given stable housing without preconditions, the majority stabilize, find work, seek treatment, and rebuild their lives. In states that invested heavily in housing first, chronic homelessness dropped by more than 30%. Michigan has tested this model, and the results are clear. But scaling it requires courage, political will, funding, and the recognition that housing is not a privilege, but a human right. We know prevention matters. Keeping people housed is far cheaper and more humane than trying to rebuild their lives after the collapse. Rental assistance, eviction diversion programs, affordable housing mandates, these tools exist. In 2024, Michigan's eviction diversion program prevented more than 9,000 families from becoming homeless. Yet funding for such programs remains fragile, vulnerable to budget cuts and political cycles. We know mental health and addiction support are essential. You cannot address homelessness without addressing trauma, without treatment for those who self-medicate their pain, without care for those fighting depression, schizophrenia, or PTSD. Expanding Medicaid coverage, increasing psychiatric services, and integrating treatment with housing are not luxuries. They are lifelines. And we know stigma must be shattered. The homeless are not others. They are us. They are the veteran who fought for this country, the grandmother who worked 30 years, the student who dreams of college, the mother who reads bedtime stories in the backseat of a car. Until society stops seeing them as problems to be swept away and starts seeing them as neighbors deserving of dignity, the cycle will continue. So what kind of Michigan, what kind of America Do we want to be in 2025 and beyond? One that looks away from people huddled under blankets on cold sidewalks, or one that steps closer, listens, and acts? Picture this: a cold January night in Detroit. Snow falls, muffling the city's noise. A man sits on the steps of an abandoned church wrapped in a thin coat. His breath is visible in the air. Cars pass by, most don't see him. To them, he is invisible, but he has a name, he has a story. And like thousands of others, he once had a home, a family, a life that looked like yours. Now picture something different. That same man a year later in a small but warm apartment. He cooks dinner on a stove. He locks his own door at night. He sleeps in a bed. He wakes not with fear but with possibility. That transformation is not a dream. It is a choice we as a society can make. Because in the end, homelessness is not just their problem. It is ours. It reflects who we are, how we care, and what we believe about one another. Michigan's story is America's story of decline, of resilience, of failure, of hope. The struggle continues. The numbers are daunting. The challenges are immense. But nothing is truly invisible if we choose to open our eyes. And maybe, just maybe, change begins with that first step.